Alrighty guys, so welcome to lesson 11. So today what we'll be doing is kind of giving you yet another way to be able to get user input and in a way that controls what the user does and also makes the entry of a list of items much easier for the user to do, and it also provides greater accuracy. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to create a combo box, a page with a combo box. Okay, so what I have now, and you can have something similar, or you could also pick a different list, but in this case, I've got a list of American states here. Okay, so there's lots of choices. There's about 50, and we want the user to be able to select from those 50 to give us information to be able to go and use that in subsequent code. Okay, so the first thing we want to do, as per usual, is we want to create a new user form and set it up so that it has all the elements that we want. So the first thing we want to do is collect insert user form. Okay, so in this case, I've got user form number 11 now. Okay, and the things that I'm going to want to have on that sheet is I'm going to want to firstly tell the user what they need to do. So in this case, I'm going to enter a label and I'm going to put in the name. So the user can please select a state. You're giving them an indication of what they need to do. The second element we need is the ability to be able to have a drop-down box that the user can select from rather than having to type in. So we can use, there are two elements we use. I tend to use the combo box versus the list box. Both will do the same thing. The only difference between the two is combo box means that you can also get the user to put in an entry that is not in the list. So for example, if you only want them to be able to put one of these states in, then you can put just a list box, and then but I tend to use a combo box. Either will work. Okay, so we'll pop that in. Okay, and then the last thing we want is once the user to be able to tell us they're finished, they're okay, and they're done. Okay, so I'm just going to click that and give it an okay. We now have our basic user form set up. Okay, now we want to be able to get the user form to disappear once we click OK and then go and use the information that we've actually got. Okay, so if we click OK, it will, the OK box, it will take us into the private sub. Now you remember that it was user form 11 in my case, so yours might be a different number. User form hide. Okay, so that means that if we show that user form 11, okay, and I click that OK button, then it should disappear. So let's create ourselves a sub and test it all out. Okay, so I'm going to get it to show user form 11. So I'm going to show, okay, and just test that we've got a basic functioning user form. Okay, so that's okay. Now if I click on that box, nothing happens because we haven't told it yet what it is that we actually want to put into that list. Okay, and then if we click OK, that means our basic movement of the box in and out of the system is fine. Okay, so the next step, what we want to do is that we want to tell the code that we want to put this information, this list of items, into that box. As per usual, as I remind you probably repeatedly, is I don't remember code. It's not necessary to remember the code per se. It's simply have it lying around somewhere. So I'm picking up some code that I have had previously. Okay, so once you enter this code, then you have solved this one particular problem and you never have to do it again. You just go and paste that new code. Okay, so what I've done is I've taken some code, and remember with a lot of code that you take from other places, it's quite okay if you don't actually precisely understand what the code's doing, as long as you know enough to be able to modify it. Okay, so let's have a look at modifying it. Okay, and before we go into that, there's one little thing that I will point out. This is actually one line of code. there is one thing that you can do is if the code is way too long, so it's really, really long like this and goes off the screen, okay, which can be a bit of a pain. So you go, what we can do is that we can actually get that code to wrap around. And the way that we do that is just an underscore. Okay, and so as far as the code is concerned and how the computer reads it, they just view that as being a single line. Okay. All right. So the next step we've got to do now is we've got to adjust this little bit of code we've got. So when we have a look at these sort of things and you get a piece of code you don't quite know what it does, you can just go for the obvious things and say, all right, what is it user form? So what user form were we using? Well, you might remember it was number 11, so we'll change that to number 11. Now, the second reference point is combo box. So we put that user form up and we can check what's the name of the combo box. And so that's combo box 1. So that's actually right in this case. But if it was combo box 2, 3, or 4. So you can see that, for example, if you decided to add a second combo box, it's probably going to be called combo box number 2. You could have more than one drop-down selection box being added to your form, for example, if there was something else that you wanted. Okay, so the next step we want to get you guys to do is we want to check the cell reference. So it's saying this workbook, that sounds okay to me. And then it gives a sheet reference. So the sheet reference in this case is sheet 1, so that's correct. So I don't need to change it. So if you had a different name of a different sheet, you decided to name it Ralph, for example, you'd have to put Ralph in there. Okay, and then our range. Okay, so we've got a bit of code here, and we'll show you what this does later, and why I do that sort of thing. But we have a cell range reference, okay, which in this case is 45 A1 to A45. So we can change that to A1 to A45. Okay, and we'll get rid of the rest of this chunk. Okay. So we have our user form up and functioning. So if you're typing it in now, just be very precise about making sure that you're putting the exact syntax in there, and then that you're also just replacing the names and the ranges for wherever your data is. Okay, so now we want to test that to see, okay, can we, oops, I'll get rid of that. Sorry about that. That was an error for something else I was doing. Let's try again. Okay, so we have a drop-down list, and there we have it. We have a long range of data, okay? All right, so that means that once we select it, it allows the user to select it. Now, if we want to test that we can actually get that data, what we can do is we can say, let's say, we'll call it our variable selection. And let's say we're going to make that equal. We're going to make that equal user form 11 in combo box number 1, for example, and message by our good friend message box, which will allow us to display what we're seeing. So this is a way of double checking that we can actually harness that data that the user has inputted. So I'm just going, because I've created a new variable there, I'm just going to pop in a variable name, dim selection. So that's to declare your variable. Okay, so what should happen now is when I select the user form and I click OK, what should happen is a message box should pop up with that selection in the screen. So we can do our test to make sure that we can actually use the data. So I'm going to, this is annoying, in the way. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to select Delaware, and I'm going to click OK, and I'll get Delaware back. So that's telling me that I'm getting the results that I'm expecting. Now, one of the things that might happen with some of your code is that you might find, for example, that for whatever reason, the amount of data that you're inputting or the amount of choices you want to give the user might change from time to time. So, for example, if, for example, you had a a program where someone was entering information about a username, you might, for example, want to say, select your username. And obviously, if people are adding usernames all the time, it means that the data is changing constantly. Okay, so I'm going to put in blah, 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 blah down the bottom just as examples. Okay, so let's say we now have 51 selections. So someone has added, for whatever reason, another 6 selections. Okay, the problem is that this code no longer works. Okay, so we want to make this code dynamic so it can deal with and it can change the selection depending upon how large or small the data is. And we can use things that we have used previously to just apply to this piece of code to be able to get it to do that. So obviously what we want to know, if we really think we take down to the heart of the matter, is we know the sheet's not changing. We just know that the range is changing, and we know that this part of the range that I'm highlighting, A45, has now changed to A51. So how do we change that? We could just put in A51, but if the data changes again, our code's no good. So, or it's not no good, but it's not quite responding to the requirements of the user. So what we want to do is we want to find some way to find out how many data entries are in this column. And of course, we can use a piece of code that we've had previously, which is a last row. So we'll just find, of course, as per usual, I don't remember the code, so I need to go and find some code that I had previously, which I'm going to go and get now. Okay, so what we want to do is, there we go. So we've got a piece of code, and that selects the last row. And I'm going to take that last row selection and create before we do anything, I'm going to declare that variable so it doesn't get upset with me. Okay, so now what we need to do is, so basically that code is your worksheet. So worksheet 1, which is the one I'm on, and we want the rows to count. Now, if I wanted to test, I know this because I've used it before, I know this works, but if I wanted to test that, I could put this line of code into a separate test sub and put a message box and see what it returned to make sure it was returning the correct thing. Okay, I'm not going to do that in this occasion. So now what we want to do is that I'm going to assume that it's going to return the value of 51. Okay, and if it does, we're going to see those additional pieces of information appear in the drop-down list, provided that we get our code right. Okay, so we know that that 45 is going to change. So we want all of this information first, which is the A1 colon to A whatever. We still want that to appear, and then we want the value of the last selection list, okay, which is this last row count. Okay, so if we do that and we push play, okay, what are you doing to me? Okay, so if I push play, and this time I'm picking Ohio, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to check out what's happened with my list. So my list has then incorporated that information. So that's fantastic. Okay, so let's say I want to just select the gobbledygook that I've put in. Okay, and that's still working. Now, just to double check it again, it's always a good idea to run a test where you change the size of the code. Okay, so now we've got 47. So there should only be 2 bits of gobbledygook at the end of the selection list if I run the code again. Okay, God, this is annoying. There we go. All right, so, and then you can see there's 2. So it's moving up and down depending upon the length of the information that's being entered into it. Okay, so that's perfect. That's what we want it to do. Okay, so we've now got a dynamic selection list, which is fantastic. So what we're going to do as the last piece of the last task that we want to get you guys to do is that we're going to get you guys to create a contact user form with a whole heap of information in it. So that information should contain a user form that collects data on somebody. So you're going to need a field that has the name, and we're going to have a selection thing to say if they're male or female. We might have which state they are coming from. So that might be, for example, if you're doing um, Australia, that might be the Northern Territory, South Australia, Victoria, etc. Okay, and we want you to create a user form that's functional, and we want you to display that data that is collected from the user on a sheet. Okay, so that is your task for today. Good luck, and we'll see you in the next class.